All right, so today we're going to talk about all things heel trimming. I've got a little slideshow worked out for that. I've got little Maverick here for the moment, but he needs to go here in a second. He's in baby shark mode. Um, so I want to talk about, all the reasons we want to bring the heel down and all of the reasons we may or may not be able to. And it would be so much easier if we could just trim every heel on every horse to a specific height, but it just doesn't work that way. Good morning, Taylor. I see you have a little much quieter version than I do. Oh, hang on. No, you're biting me. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get going into the slideshow and we'll see if anybody else joins us as we go. Okay, you got to go. You have to go. No, no, no. Come back when you're sleepy. All right. Let's see here. Share my screen. Get rid of that. Start my slideshow. All right, so all things heel trimming. Let me get that open. Okay, so when we're thinking about trimming the heel, and we're going to cover when to trim and when not to trim as we go here as well, but we want to make sure that we're measuring the heel height from the coronary band to the heel surface. That's super important because underneath those heel bulbs is our lateral cartilage growing off the back wings of the coffin bone. And if we only measure our heel surface flat across the bottom plane of the heel, we are not going to be realigning those lateral cartilage. And often we can end up with a sheared heel or an imbalance there. So I really want to make sure that I can align those and allow them, if one is high, say, allow it to descend down and create an even plane in the back of the foot. So it's really important to measure from the coronary band to the surface, not just lay your rasp flat across the two heels and assume that they're even because they're on the same plane. So that's going to help us measure sheared heels. And the other thing we want to do when we're bringing those heels down is hold the rasp at an angle parallel to the bottom of the collateral grooves. And this is kind of a misnomer. It's kind of like when we talk about trimming the coffin bone to ground parallel. We don't actually trim the coffin bone to ground parallel. We trim it to 3 to 5 degrees off of ground parallel so that at peak impact, when the back of the foot descends down, that maximum point of impact is when the coffin is ground parallel. But then everything comes back up at, say, a standstill or when the limb isn't loaded in the stride. So I know that's really confusing. It's just part of the terminology that we say we trim the coffin bone to be ground parallel. And what we mean is it is ground parallel at peak impact, not at a standstill. If you take a radiograph of a hoof at a standstill, it should have that 3 to 5 degrees of positive angle so that there's room for that descension. If you take a radiograph and it shows ground parallel at a standstill, then it's going to sink down to a negative angle at peak impact. And so the same thing is kind of true for rasping the heel to match the bottom of the collateral groove angle. If we got that angle absolutely perfect and matched the heel to the bottom of the coffin bone, we would create a ground parallel coffin bone at a standstill and potentially a negative angle at peak impact. But I find that I can tell people to mimic that angle with their rasp, and I have yet to see anybody match that angle enough that they actually trim the coffin bone to be ground parallel. Usually we end up with that perfect 3 to 5 degrees. And I think it's just that the bottom of the collateral groove angle is so hard to visualize. Like we're looking down this deep, dark crevice and we're attempting to match it, but we just don't seem to get 100% accuracy, which works in our favor because we end up with that 3 to 5 degrees. The other thing I want to cover here is when to trim and how far. Again, I wish I could just tell everybody trim that to an inch and an eighth. And while we do talk about the averages, the average horse of average bone structure and height has approximately an inch and an eighth heel length, assuming everything is perfectly healthy through their foot, their body, their biomechanics, and all of that. And then we have all these deviations as to when we would not trim a heel that far, because realistically, we have to prioritize the comfort of the horse. If we trimmed every heel down, we're not going to add adequate stimulation to every frog and just have massive frogs and digital cushions. We're going to have a whole bunch of horses that are sore and land on their toe, and then their frog and digital cushion atrophies and becomes worse. So it's a really delicate line, lowering those heels or not, depending on each individual horse. A long time ago, myself and several other barefoot trimmers, we really talked about trimming all heels down to that 1.1 inch and forcing the horses to load the frog and digital cushion to create a more robust and healthy back of the foot, because with stimulation it all strengthens. So we thought we could force it, and all we did was force all of those horses up onto their toes or flat. It doesn't actually benefit the horse if they're not ready for it, if they're not comfortable. You can actually make a horse land heel first more prominently. If the back of their foot is weak and you leave a little extra heel to cushion that impact, they'll be able to manage that versus dropping them down onto it. And so we're going to go through those as we go through this slideshow. Are you back? Are you going to be sleepy this time? Because if you're just going to bite me, you're not staying. All right. Okay, so this foot, I thought we'd just go through a few examples. And what I like to do is it's much easier in person because you can use a Sharpie and you're not using a computer program. But the blue line is just following the hairline. Approximately where I think the root of the hair is, I try to pick a static point on the hairline as opposed to just the length of the hair, because obviously that's not very reliable. And it's not so much that I'm using that blue line to determine my mapping. Where I am using it is kind of right at the collateral groove exit where these green lines are. And it's not so much about measuring the collateral groove exit. I mean, we want to put our 1.1 inch mark there. I kind of do it just to see, just to show me where that 1.1 inch lies and whether or not I'm close to it or not. It doesn't mean I'm going to trim to it. And so on this horse, let's just say that would be this orange line here. And so we're going from coronary band up somewhere along here. Now, I don't remember which horse this is, or even if it was my picture. So we can't factor in all of the things we need to determine heel height. Like, is this horse landing heel first? Are they comfortable? How thrushy is that frog? I mean, I can sort of see it, but I can't really see the bottom of the frog. But what we can assess here is the balance, and is this heel trimmed evenly? And if you look at the upper orange line, which we have run parallel to the bottom one here, we can see that we're even on this side, or maybe a bit short. It's actually a bit hard to tell, but we're sticking up above on the lateral side. So this heel is not even to the lateral cartilage. Now, if you held a rasp across the top of it, it would probably seem somewhat even, or maybe a little slanted inward, but I would definitely want to even that up so that the lateral cartilage could be balanced in the back of the foot. So looking at this one, we kind of have the same thing. This is lady's foot. I don't know why I can tell that, but I can. So the blue line is following the hairline here. And then we've got this bottom orange line. I just draw where the collateral groove exit would be at the hairline on both sides. And so that's my bottom line. And I do actually like to do this on the computer because you can copy and paste the line so it comes in at the exact same angle and you're not having to worry about, did you even them out? So let's say our 1.1 inch is here, or at least the bottom of our collateral groove exit is. On this particular horse, she's a founder rehab, so I like to leave extra heel and quarter on her. And then if we draw our line of where are the heels right now, same as the last photo, we're high here. For her, this is the medial side. We're high on this side compared to this side, if we're going hairline to hairline. And again, this is really subjective on a picture as well. If you have that hoof angled just a little bit in either direction, it's going to skew these perceptions. So anytime I do markups in the classroom about heels, like, oh, maybe this one's high or this one's high, I always word it as if to say, double check that in real life, because if that picture's off even just a little bit, it's not quite going to correlate. All right. So, and this is a great example. This picture is off. I don't think this is my picture. But it is a great example of a sheared heel and a super crooked coffin joint. So same thing, the blue line is showing us our hairline. It's also an example of a bit of a prolapsed frog, which we're going to talk about in a second also. But we've got our bottom line, and I'm probably a little off here. I was kind of guessing because the picture is crooked and it's a little bit overexposed, so it's hard to see. But something like this, and you can see the complete crookedness in the shoe, but you can also see it here in the height of the medial side compared to the lateral side. And so, in this particular picture, I'm not really going to criticize the farrier that did that. I don't know what their plan was. And again, the picture is off. So I have to be careful with that. But I really want to prioritize the vertical height on both sides at the back of the foot, hairline to surface, to make sure that we can create balance in the back of that foot. This one, kind of the same idea. So we've got our hairline coming through the back, our collateral grooves marked in green, and then we show kind of this heel is trimmed kind of right into the middle of these two lines, but this side over here is up at the top. So they're not quite even. I would want to bring that down. And I believe this was Margot's horse. I can't remember. I think it was. And he had a very sheared heel, and we've been working on this for a long time. So this is a work in progress. And as we talk about reasons not to trim a heel, this kind of situation, hey, Math, he's dragging his bone across the floor, making noise. This kind of situation is a good reason where we may not be able to create like balance or evenness in those heels in one trim, because for whatever reason, perhaps this high side is already at the sole and we can't bring it down any further. I don't want to sacrifice one side of the foot just to create balance in the other. Maverick, hey. Oh, good. He brought it on the carpet. It'll be much quieter now. Because we would be over trimming that side if we did that. I would rather leave the horse in a state of imbalance and let the lower side grow and catch up, or hopefully be able to bring that high side down through a series of shorter trim intervals. And that's an important thought. Adrian asked this question yesterday in the virtual classroom. I can't remember if it was this exact picture or a similar one, kind of the same thing. And she had said that she'd left the heels crooked on a couple of her horses because they need a higher heel height, but one side was worn down. And so would you over trim the high side to make them match, or do you leave a horse crooked? And neither one is really a great option. I don't want to over trim anything, because if you over trim the high side, you could cause sensitivity and cause them to land on the toe. But if you don't trim it, you're leaving them crooked, which is going to have implications up the leg through the joints. So I guess in a perfect world, I would apply composites with a little bit of a glue wedge on the low side to even them up until they're even. But that's not always feasible. And if we have to leave the horse barefoot, I would rather probably leave them in balance than leave them sore from over trimming on the high side. That's just kind of my thought about it. And I do think there's like a margin of imbalance which is tolerable to a horse. I'm not saying we should let them go around imbalanced all the time, but if we think about a sheared heel, and I've seen them as bad as a complete inch in different heights on either side. And if we think about all the joints in the lower limb absorbing that, a little bit through each one, I mean, an inch is a lot, but a quarter inch being displaced between three different joints isn't as bad, or an eighth of an inch, like in the case of this picture here. I don't think it's necessarily horrible in the short term. I just wouldn't want to leave it long term like that. Okay, so when we start talking about trimming to mimic the bottom of the collateral grooves, this is where things get a little bit challenging and kind of hard to interpret. And so what I've done with this picture is kind of put in where I suspect the coffin bone will be with that triangle. And I've drawn our line down the front of the foot to show us where the coffin bone angle is coming in and how much flare we would need to take. I actually flipped this picture around because I found it easier to do that with it right side up versus upside down. But then when we come back and we think about trimming the heels to be parallel to the bottom of the coffin bone, it would look something like this line here. Now, obviously, we're not trimming them down to there, or we'd be cutting through the lateral cartilage and heel bulb, but that's just the plane at which they need to be trimmed on. And you can see how that compares to the plane that they are currently trimmed on. I believe the next picture, no. This is the picture I was looking for. This is the same foot. And so the green is showing us the angle the heel should be trimmed on, while the orange is showing the angle that it's currently at. And if we flip it around, I know there's a lot here, so bear with me. It's hard to look at. The green is where our coffin bone is sitting within the hoof capsule. We can see that with our new growth coming down. We've got quite a lot of flare here. I don't know that I'd necessarily take that all in one go, but the orange is showing the angle that the heel is currently trimmed on and the angle that coffin bone would have to be sitting in to match that. And so we'd actually be creating a bit of a negative angle by trimming these heels at that plane. We need to angle that back a little bit more in order to align the internal structures. And I know that if we look over here, if you angled this heel back, and I'm not saying trim them all the way back to here, I'm just saying at this angle, you're going to end up with this high point in front of the quarter. And we have to come in and smooth that out into our quarter arch also. We don't want the back of the heel rockered coming up to a point in the quarter and then flat. But what we need to do is like replane the entire bottom of the foot to be ground parallel to the coffin bone. If we leave it like this, we're just lifting that horse up onto that sole plane, as opposed to creating a plane that's more in line with the internal structures. So same thing here. If you look at the green line, that's our estimate of the bottom of the collateral groove, versus the orange line is the plane the heel has already been trimmed to. And what happens when we do this is we also allow the heel to migrate forward and forward and forward. And I do think this is a huge issue with how prevalent underrun heels are right now. It is definitely a toe issue as well, but the angle we're trimming the heel plays a factor. Hi, Mav. And so the same thing over here, we've got our coffin bone. This is just the same picture flipped around. I see it better like this in terms of evaluating where the coffin bone is and our connected hoof wall coming in. And then we have the orange line showing the plane at which this hoof is trimmed on, and the green line showing a more accurate plane to the bottom of the coffin bone. Again, we are not trimming heels this short. This green line would need to come down quite significantly. It's all about the angle we're trimming it, not necessarily how deep. Okay, so when should we leave heels high? There's so many factors. I know I made a list in the slideshow, but I sat here this morning making a list on paper as well, just to make sure I didn't forget anything. So we're going to kind of go through this, and I'll make sure I cover all the things on my list. Contracted tendons or club foot. And I lump those two together because they are both kind of a conformational body issue that plays into heel height. They're not the same. Not all club-footed horses have contracted tendons, or vice versa. This particular hoof, the one on the left, was a club foot, and the horse did have contracted tendons. He had kind of all the bad things going on. But in this case, with this horse, contracted tendons mean that the tendons have actually shrunk and they do not have the elasticity to stretch down. So if we were to come and chop his heels off to 1 1/8 inches, because that's the average, we can cause huge injury to him and soreness, and that heel won't be touching the ground and all of those things. So we really do have to factor that into our trimming plan. I knew right from the get-go with this horse, he was never going to have the quote normal looking feet. He came quite significantly worse than this, and this is where we were able to get him to and just manage a state of maintenance for him. Clubfoot, the coffin bone on a club-footed horse actually has a steeper than normal dorsal angle. And so because of that, it tends to sit in a more elevated position with a higher degree of angle than a regular foot. And there's varying degrees of clubfoot, like a grade 1 through 4 type of situation. He was a grade 3 clubfoot, meaning he wasn't totally vertical or behind the vertical, but he was close. Maverick, what are you doing? I only brought him in because Julie was like, I missed Maverick on the last Zoom. And at the last Zoom, I was like, he is so distracting and I can't get anything done. I'm not bringing him. And now here he is being a little menace again. So, Julie, this one was for you. But after this, he's going in his bed. Okay. Um, so with a club foot, a lot of people, myself included, a long time ago, I wanted to always bring those heels down as much as I could to quote correct a club foot. But club foot is truly a conformational defect in the bone structure of the horse, and you are not going to fix it. It's there usually for life by the time it forms. And there is some debate as to whether or not a club foot is genetic or situational. And I actually think it can be both personally. But either way, we can't fix it. We have to manage it. And quite often you can manage a club foot to a point that you would never know it's really there. My paint Rain was a great example of that. She wasn't born with a club foot, but she developed one from the grazing stance of always having one foot forward and one foot back. But right from, when she was, I don't know, 2 or 3 months old, I started, well, it wasn't really an issue then. It was as she got a little bit bigger, but I kept that trim even on both sides. And when I sold her, like if you didn't know she had a club foot, you wouldn't really see it. I saw it because I saw it right from the beginning, but I kept it so well managed, it was almost not visible. But I think if you compared the radiographs on a regular basis, you would see a couple degrees difference in her. And so that's as effectively managed as I could do with her. So anyways, in saying that, there's a few stretches I do on horses that have club feet or contracted tendons. And I also do these on horses that have just had really high heels for a long length of time, just to make sure they don't have contracted tendons. This is really common on minis. Minis tend to grow ridiculously high heels if they're not maintained properly. And so before I just go in and chop off an inch of heel, I want to make sure the horse has the mobility to do so. I think the next picture, yeah, is of that stretch. This is just one of the stretches I do. Bring the leg out to the front first. Ask the horse to straighten the knee. Oftentimes, if they have contracted tendons, they can't even straighten the knee. This guy was like Gumby horse, and thank goodness for him with his situation. He actually, while he did have contracted tendons, they weren't as bad as I've seen in other horses. So he could straighten his knee. But what he could not do was tip the toe upward in the hoof when the knee was straight. When you try to do that, he would pull his leg back because it was uncomfortable. And I always tell people, like, I really caution you, do this 3 or 4 times on each leg. Don't just do it once, the horse pulls his leg back and you go, oh, yeah, contracted tendons. Because a lot of times, if they don't have an owner that does these type of stretches with them, they're just not sure of what you're doing. And so they're mentally tight and uncomfortable. It's not necessarily always physical. So you do have to be really mindful of that. This horse lived here for many, many years, and we did lots of these types of stretches and things with him. So that probably contributed to the fact that he wasn't as contracted as he could be. But again, even if I'm just trimming an overwhelming amount of heel off of a horse and they don't have contracted tendons or clubfoot, I still like to do these stretches just to be sure that they have the mobility that I can bring that heel down. If a horse pulls their leg back and goes, oh, that's uncomfortable, and kind of gives me signs that they can't do those stretches, then I'm going to be a lot less aggressive in trimming those heels down. I might not trim them at all, depending on how severe the response is. I was talking to another farrier, Kara Lucas, the Duplo Canada representative out in Alberta, about these stretches one time. And she said the one that she really likes to do is she brings the leg back as if we were going to trim it, and holds it back and tips the toe down. And that kind of puts the leg in a lesser state of extension to try those flexions. So if you have a horse that's really struggling with this one, this is kind of the harder stretch of the two. So you could try bringing the leg underneath and see if they have any mobility that way as well. But if they can't handle this one, that's a red flag for me. So I'm going to be a lot more conservative in trimming those heels, even if they pass the other one. So another place where I won't trim heels as much is a horse with lack of concavity, founder, flat soles, or even retracted soles. And I don't want to get too off track here talking about retracted soles, but my education and experience with retracted soles is sort of growing. In previous conversations and previous Zoom videos, we've kind of talked about retracted soles, and I never really thought they were a real thing. And what I mean is, I don't mean it didn't happen and the horses weren't sore and didn't have thin soles. What I mean is retracted sole isn't a very good term. And I think those horses were having thin soles and solar inflammation for sure. I just, a retracted sole where they think, or that implies that the sole sucks up within the hoof capsule. Well, the sole cannot go anywhere. It's attached to the bottom of the coffin bone. It cannot just all of a sudden develop more concavity than the bottom of the coffin bone has. So I really just don't like the term, and I don't think that's a thing. But what they present as and what they're calling retracted sole is a thin sole that's weak, and usually you can squish it under your pressure of your thumbs. And also it shows very steep concavity coming up to the toe callus. And what I think is actually happening is, and I don't have enough information, I have to do some more research, but due to moisture content in the ground or in the environment, everything kind of becomes soft and the sole sort of loses its rigidity and can collapse on itself a little bit, which can create inflammation under the bottom of the coffin bone, which any type of inflammation is going to inhibit the growth and thickness of the sole. And so then the sole becomes weak and the horse becomes sensitive. And I have 2 horses here right now dealing with both retracted soles. I'd like a better name, but if I start calling it something different, nobody's going to understand what I'm talking about. And those horses, we had the weirdest winter. Normally here we have snow and ice and the ground is frozen solid all winter long. And this past winter, it was so warm and wet. The horses lived in mud all winter. And none of us are really prepared for that. Like down on the coast and on the island, everybody puts in crusher rock and drainage and prepares for their muddy seasons so the horses aren't living in mud. Well, nobody here really did that because we're not used to that type of winter. Usually the ground is frozen and the horses aren't living in mud. And so I think, like I've seen a huge prevalence of retracted sole this spring because of all the horses living in swamp type environments all winter. And the 2 thoroughbreds here, and I don't mean to generalize breed wise, but that's what it is. Two of the thoroughbreds that are boarded here, both right now have retracted soles. And I saw a quarter horse at the last course that had retracted soles also. And so it's kind of gotten me down this road of doing some research and figuring out what to do for them. The only person who has really got any published studies on retracted sole is Esco Buff. He's a farrier from, I believe, the US. And like if you just Google retracted soles, every article you find will probably cite the one paper he wrote about it. There is very little information out there about retracted soles, and his paper and nothing I read could actually tell you the definitive cause other than it seems to be moisture related. And so anyways, I'm getting kind of off track, but what I'm learning is for these 2 that are here, leaving a little extra wall height or applying a composite shoe has helped them immensely. They've gone from almost looking laminitic to completely sound. And I think if you treat it as a thin sole, like a very thin, collapsed, founder type sole, we just need to add protection and artificial concavity and help those horses. I'm kind of stuck in a catch-22 because what Esco says, I shouldn't say they, it's one paper. What he says is leave the wall long to provide artificial concavity, but even when they have flared feet. So if we have a tremendous amount of flare and the coffin bone is descended down and you have this thin sole, if we leave it long like that, we're never going to trim our way out of it. It's never going to improve, is how I look at it. And so if I did not have the luxury of applying a composite shoe, then yes, I would leave it long and let it flare. I can deal with the flare later, assuming that the sole hardens up and has enough rigidity to support some weight in the future. But being that I can use composite shoes and pads and packing and all of these cool things, I have just opted to do that and protect the horses. And so Bruno walked into the barn. I just put his on this morning before this Zoom, and he walked in. He's fine on the mulch. He's fine in the sand. But walking over, we have this little gravel wash area in the front of the barn. he was like, no, thank you. I'm super uncomfortable. And then in the barn, he was fine. And so I glued the shoes on. And as I walked him out, he paused in front of the gravel, like, oh no, this is not going to be cool. And then he took 2 steps and he all of a sudden floated across the gravel. It was pretty cute watching how comfortable he became. And he's used to composite shoes. He's worn them a lot. So it wasn't a big deal. But anyways, that's enough about retracted soles. I just wanted to add it in there because I'm dealing with it and it's so prevalent here in our area right now at the moment. In the past, it hasn't, like, we're more of a deserty type environment. It hasn't really been a big thing, but with that past winter, it was terrible. Okay, so not trimming the heels down in these cases, retracted soles, founder, thin sole, flat feet, it's all kind of the same idea. It's about providing artificial concavity to the bottom of the foot. That's what it's about. It's not about not wading the frog, and those are the sacrifices we make. And I don't love that, but I'd rather keep the horse comfortable. This picture on the right, I included last year when I did this, when I made this slideshow. This was a quarter horse mare named Jewel that I had boarded here for years. And she was one of my guinea pigs and my poor mistakes. She's the one who taught me about solar inflammation and rehabilitating founder. She was here for years, super foundered when she got here, and nothing I could do could cause her to grow in connected wall connection, lift up that coffin bone, and grow a thick sole. She was always sore after every trim. I had her in boots and pads forever. This was before composite shoes and glue-ons were really a thing. I think I even nailed metal shoes on her at one point because I was so desperate trying to figure out what was going on. Anyways, the reason she kept getting sore is because I kept dropping her down onto her little flat sole like this, and causing solar inflammation. Had I known what I know now, if I'd have just left her heels high, I could have provided the artificial lift to protect her sole while keeping the toe beveled back aggressively and growing in connected hoof wall. That's how I do it now. This poor horse, and I will say, she left here. I sold her to a family with little kids out north of here, and she left here sound and happy. I had fixed her feet, but man, it was like a 3-year journey with her going through hell trying to figure that out. And so I think of her every single time I trim a horse with a flat foundered sole and I leave those heels high, because she really helped me in my learning journey, which is why the picture's still here. It's a good reminder for me, and I think it's super important to talk about our failures. She was a huge failure, but also a huge success because I learned so much from her. And unfortunately, there's been kind of a few of those horses along the way on the journey that you just don't know something until it really, clicks. And for me, that was her. Anyways, with this whole solar inflammation thing and founder rehab and leaving the heels high and what we can do for those horses. All right. Thrush and prolapsed frog. Okay, thrush is pretty obvious. The hoof on the left is extreme example, but even a little bit of thrush can cause a horse to be sore in the back of the foot, and leaving a slightly longer heel will lift them up and kind of take some of the pressure off of that frog at impact and allow the horse to continue to land heel first. Whereas if we chop those heels down and force them to load it, it might be too uncomfortable that it caused them to articulate up onto their toe. Prolapsed frog, I mean, that's really the same thing. It's not thrush, but it's an extremely sensitive frog and digital cushion that is kind of descending down out the back of the foot, usually a result of traditional shoeing with an open-heeled shoe, which is the case here on the right side. This is an extreme example. It would be absolutely inhumane to leave this horse barefoot like that. They would be so sore and uncomfortable because the frog and digital cushion has completely prolapsed. I won't say never because I do, but I very rarely ever cut the frog support out of a composite shoe, but I would for this horse. And it's not that it totally negates the frog pressure, because of course, even with a metal shoe, the horse's hoof is still going to sink into the terrain and get some pressure on the frog and digital cushion. But if we dropped them down like this, it would be so much pressure they wouldn't be able to walk. And so, cutting the frog support out of the shoe for a month or two will allow them to get a secondary type of pressure onto that frog and digital cushion. And usually, even in that short period of time, like 3 to 4 weeks, it will start to migrate back up into the hoof where it's supposed to be. Prolapsed frog isn't a super common one. I have seen it a few times and it's dramatic. the one that stands out in my mind, I know I've told this story before, so I'll be quick, but it was a quarter horse mare named Bentley, and I had gone and pulled her shoes, and I think I was nailing composites at the time, and I nailed the composites on, and that horse could not walk. She couldn't even walk out of the driveway where I had just worked on her. It was so dramatic. She looked like she was going to fall down, and I cut the frog support out of the shoe, and she was instantly sound. It was just, she had an extreme prolapsed frog, and the sensitivity in weighting that was too much for her to bear. At the next set, we were able to switch over to a composite shoe with frog support, and she was fine and so much better. She was also extremely foundered, so she had that going on as well, but it was very dramatic. They get really sensitive from overstimulation in the back of the foot, especially when it's weak, and if it's prolapsed, it usually is. All right, contracted heels, caudal hoof failure. I kind of lump those together because they do tend to go hand in hand. With a contracted foot, the heels are closer together and the area for the frog and digital cushion is more narrow, which means you're just going to have less digital cushion and a weaker frog pretty much no matter what you do. Sometimes you can improve it a little bit and get the heels to kind of open up just a bit and grow a healthier frog, which is great. But other times you're kind of stuck with the limit of space in between the back of the coffin bone. Caudal hoof failure, which we previously called navicular syndrome and navicular disease, is a weakness in the back of the foot through the frog and digital cushion. And I think caudal hoof failure is just a much more broad term that kind of encapsulates it all. Whether there's navicular bone damage or not, we still need to support the back of the foot so that the horses can land heel first and absorb that impact. And so, again, we learn from our mistakes. And in the past, we would chop the heels off of these navicular syndrome horses and thinking we were forcing them to load the back of the foot, and all they would do is land more prominently on their toe. So we would even get creative and walk them down hills, because they had no choice but to load the back of the foot, and it actually worked. I rehabilitated several navicular horses that way, by forcing them to walk up and down hills. Walking up they could load the toe, but going down they had to load the heel, and it would allow them to strengthen and stimulate the back of the foot. But we're much more effective now in using boots and padding and composite shoes and hoof packing to provide protection and impact absorption in the back of the foot so that what is there in the hoof can bear the brunt of the impact with whatever's left after the hoof packing and the composite shoe. So it's kind of like dampening it so that the hoof can absorb part of it so that it can strengthen and regenerate to the point that we can lessen the protection and eventually get back to barefoot. That works really well. And the ability to change out the density of the hoof packing through the composite shoes, go from a super protective composite shoe like an Easy Shoe Octo to a 3D or to an NG or a Performance or something a little less bulky and less covering. It kind of allows us to really play around and experiment with exactly how much impact the horse's back of the foot can take. And so I typically find horses who work in deeper footing too, like a deeper sand arena compared to a harder packed sand arena, tend to like just a little bit more heel because they're sinking into the ground. And again, it's always about over pressurizing the digital cushion. We walk a really fine line between pressure equals stimulation, growth, and strength, and too much pressure equals discomfort and altered movement and then toe first landings. So we have to be really careful as we navigate our way through that. But it's definitely worthwhile. So these types of horses often benefit from support or a longer heel and not just bringing it down to the sole level for the sake of bringing it down. We really have to evaluate so many factors in thinking about heels, not just the hoof we're staring at and what it looks like in terms of hoof health, but how it's functioning for the horse, how they're moving, how they're loading it. All of those things are so important. This is just a great picture series from Paige Poss of Anatomy of the Equine. Hoof number 1 just shows us nice, robust lateral cartilage and digital cushion. I like this picture because it shows us how big and wide it is and how everything is sitting. And then we have a slightly less than optimal hoof in the middle. It still has a fairly nice digital cushion and lateral cartilage. It's nice and wide, but it's not as full as the first one. And the third one is more that contracted hoof. You can see how narrow it is. You can see how much less digital cushion space there is here. So it's all about developing the back of that foot through stimulation, but not forcing it, because then you're just going to cause them to land on their toe and everything you're doing is kind of negated. You can see pictures here. On the left, we have a horse coming in, landing prominently heel first. That's kind of picture perfect. And on the right, you have a horse coming in through the extension of the stride and landing on the toe. And so, there's actually debate online, and there's a farrier, I think he's out of Australia, I can't really remember, that used to comment on some of my social media posts and how it's normal for horses to land toe first because that's what we see all the time. And that I always thought was alarming, that it's become so normal, we just think it's okay. And even in some of the really amazing bodywork groups, or biomechanic groups, I see pictures of horses landing toe first. And some of them are touting it, and they're not talking about the toe first landing, but they're talking about the muscles in the top line and how amazing and free and relaxed those horses look. And I'm looking at the stride going, something is still not right. It might be better, and it might be better, like improved from what they had before, but there's still something missing. And you can even see in a horse that's loading the toe, they don't have full extension of the knee joint. It's not quite extended as far as it could be. And now, it's a little bit subjective. It's not the same horse. It'd be nice to have the same horse with a toe first landing and then say 6 months later with the heel first to really compare the length of the stride. But so many things are negated when we have that toe first landing. I think it's really important. All right, and another big one, why we shouldn't lower the heels all the time is negative plantar palmar angles. And that's, you know, I usually from an underrun heel or a long toe, everything kind of comes forward and we end up with that ground parallel or possibly negative angle at rest. And so through impact of the stride, when everything descends down, it's negative, and that's going to strain all the tendons and going up the back of the leg, which will lead to muscle problems and soreness and all of those things. Most often we see it in the back feet, but we can see it in the front feet as well, if they're particularly underrun. So in these cases, these horses with underrun heels or negative angles, I tend to not trim the heels at all. Even though they're super ugly and they're folded over and they're usually running way forward, it's better to leave that vertical height there in the wrong spot while we work on trimming the toe back and better wall connection to elevate everything so the heel can come in more vertically than it would be to just bring them back. We used to bring them back thinking that if we trimmed them and brought them back, it would pressurize the tubules in a more appropriate angle and cause them to come in straighter. And it did work a little bit, but it's not as effective as just leaving them and addressing the root of the problem, which is usually wall connection and a long toe. Um, in bad in bad cases where the horse is uncomfortable due to the negative angle, I will actually apply a wedge with a composite shoe. I don't love wedges and I don't love to use them long term, due to the fact that they can cause contraction in the tendons, and it kind of is an artificial band-aid to the hoof. But sometimes that is necessary until we can grow in a more vertically upright hoof capsule, so that we can create comfort in the horse's body. A good example of that is one of the horses I have here. When I first got her, she had extreme negative angles in the hinds, and she had swelling around the tendons on the back of the leg. Due to the negative angle, it also caused rotation in her pelvis and made her lower back sore. And so she was just a mess. And by adding wedges, I could alleviate the rotation in the pelvis, the strain on the lower back, the stretching of the tendons, and she felt immediately better, even though I was then compromising the foot by adding the wedge. So it's really a trade-off that we have to make carefully, but it's calculated. If a horse is sore and uncomfortable and not moving, nothing we do in terms of the trim is going to help anyway, because the hoof needs movement and stimulation. So we have to get them comfortable so that they move, so that we can build the healthy foot. And sometimes that means those type of devices and things. So this is just a great picture of before and after of a negative angle. Kind of an estimation of where the coffin bone is. So here you can see the front is raised up, the heels are low and underrun. And this after picture, we've got the heel coming in. It's still not perfect, but it's way more vertical than on the left. And we've got healthy wall connection and everything's starting to come together. And then I just have a short video here. I believe it's in the classroom anyway. In guide 2, it's trimming the heels on Mustang, who I now have called Chicken Hawk, who is very slowly working his way to just Hawk because he's almost not a chicken anymore. But we're getting there. Anyways, I'll play this quick. I think it's just a minute long, and then we'll do a discussion and see what kind of questions we've brought up. And then I can look at my other list. All right. I just thought that was relevant and short, not super long. So let's see here. Let me bring up my settings and make sure my sound is still working because it's probably not. Did that bring about any questions? Go ahead, Amanda.
My question was back when you were talking about the angle of the soul as it was versus the angle of the bottom of the coffin bone. You said, of course, we can't rasp at the angle we'd go through the heel bulb, but we need to, it's about the angle that we're rasping at. But I'm wondering, I guess I can't wrap my mind around that because I would just think, are you saying over time you'd bring it down so you can't get it at the correct angle, but you would bring it more steep than it was? Or it sounds like you would end up rockering it, which we don't want to do if you end up changing your rasp to the angle of the bottom of the coffin bone. Obviously, you're not bringing the heel down that far, but I guess I'm just confused what action step you would take if you wanted to change the fact that the plane was at one angle when the bottom of the coffin bone is at another.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to share this and look at this picture again because I had just put the line a little too low. Like this is the green line is the angle of the bottom of the collateral groove that I'm estimating. And so if I were going to trim this foot, I would trim at that angle. I wouldn't trim so deep, like back down to here, obviously. I would trim that angle way up here. So I would be taking almost nothing off and then rounding out this point just in front of it. So I am trimming to it, just not like this picture. I would still trim at this plane, but it would be way up here. So I would just be taking off this little teeny bit, and then I would blend that in through the quarter. So I would be replaning the bottom of the hoof to match the bottom of the coffin bone, just not like, if you put this line down here, I mean, we can't trim that. So it's a real conservative trim, but it is replaning the angle of the heel. And then as we came forward with our rasp, we would take out this bump in front. Um, I don't know what I had. Like this one here. Again, we're not coming all the way down to here, but we're going to take just the top of the heel off. And it's kind of funny when people call it a rocker. I laugh like in my head. I think like if everybody just rockered heels, we'd be so much better off. Because I don't actually think a rocker is a real rocker. What everyone thinks is a rocker is the correct angle you should be trimming the heels at, and an actual rocker is significantly steeper rounding of the back heel surface. But I know a lot of farriers who would see those lines that I just showed you and be like, oh yeah, so you want to rocker the heel. I think it's kind of like the retracted sole thing, what you call it and what we're actually doing. We still want to plane the foot to that angle. It even if it's really tiny and it's only a tiny little spot, we're angling like that, because you have to think of the hoof in motion. And if you put like where that blue line was and you just take that little triangle of hoof off, as that hoof comes forward in the stride, the heels are going to land on that little triangle and then ramp down through the stride into breakover and away. So that plane is essentially going to load the back of the foot and strengthen the digital cushion, and be ground parallel with the coffin bone through that phase of the stride. And so we're still angling it there. It's just that we might not be able to take a lot of heel. Whereas, like if you had a horse with an overgrown heel and it's like 1.5 inches long or 2 inches long, well, then we have enough material that we can actually like do the whole thing, and it's like what you'd be picturing in your mind, as replaning the bottom of that foot, when in the reality is very few horses have that much heel. In fact, usually they're underrun and don't have enough heel, and so we still want to angle at that plane. We're just making little tiny incremental changes to try to get there. Does that sort of help?
It does. And then would the whole plane of the sole be at that level?
Yes.
Or if you're like, no, no, you'll never have the whole sole that way, just always the heel
Oh,
at
you
the plane
you should
bottom.
be able to get there because the sole is grown from the bottom of the coffin bone. And if we are aligning to that angle of the bottom of the collateral groove, it's all gonna come together eventually. But in order to do that, you need super tight wall connection and elevation of the coffin bone and a thick sole. And often we don't have all of those things. It's not the kind of perfect quote storm. But when all those things come together, they should both be in alignment. All right. Any more questions? Julie, you joined us late. I had the little baby shark at the beginning just for you, but he was biting my face off, so I put him on the floor. Now he's sleeping quietly under the chair like a good little dog. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, let me
Christy,
look through.
I'm so
Yeah,
sorry. I have one more. I don't mean to monopolize it, but when I pulled my one gelding's, actually both his front feet up,
hang on.
they're not at the same level almost. So the bulbs themselves, but when I look from the hairline to the to the heel, they're even, but the actual bulbs themselves, is that a normal physiological difference to have the bulbs not quite at the same elevation? I don't know if you know what I'm talking about or if you've ever seen that, but I felt them. I thought, oh goodness, they're not the same, but maybe they never are. Or maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Well, you should post a picture of that so I can see it. Theoretically, they should be equal. For the perfect horse that doesn't have any asymmetry in their leg, like zero crookedness, it's perfectly straight. I'm not sure those horses exist. So, if one side is getting weighted more than the other, it's totally feasible for it to be more robust and maybe a little bit higher up. But it would be helpful to see a picture to really evaluate the balance. I wouldn't panic and I wouldn't think you're doing it wrong just because of that. I would watch your horse move, and I would suspect possibly the slightly larger or more upright side is getting more weight than the other side. And so through the stride, perhaps they're not loading totally equally. would be my thought. But I don't know that I would panic if they're loading slightly more to one side because of a crookedness or an asymmetry or something higher up. It would be, important to try to balance that if you could, but I don't think I would like alter the trim and force more weight onto one side, so to speak. All right. I was just gonna go through my list. Reasons to leave heels high. I think I covered these: thrush, prolapsed frog, weak caudal foot, caudal failure, navicular disease, contracted tendons, club foot, founder and flat soles, retracted soles, NPA, sheared heels. Yeah, pretty much. The only other one was, why do we want to trim the heel? Like, okay, so if we covered all these reasons we shouldn't trim the heels, which is like 99% of horses, why do we actually think we should trim the heels? Maybe we should just ignore them and never trim them. Because having a low heel allows the rearmost weight-bearing surface of the hoof to come back underneath the limb. It pressurizes the frog and therefore the digital cushion, which allows it to absorb all the impact. It there's so many good benefits from loading the back of the foot, primarily the impact absorption, that I don't think we should negate, the whole idea and just forget about it. I just think it needs to be this piece in our mind that we strive for, and we make all of these other adaptations as we need to. Because again, and I can't stress it enough, I've learned this through trial and error and mistake. So if we leave the horse a little bit higher heel and apply a composite or packing or a boot or a pad, or maybe just the higher heel is enough, they can articulate through the stride better and more comfortably, so that it will over time strengthen the back of the foot, so we can work toward bringing that down. But you cannot just cut it off and force the horse to load it. I wish it worked like that. In reading the Pete Ramey book the other day, I've still been kind of going through it, reading more. He says, if I could lame a horse, but put the correct trim on them, and maybe have them be lame for 3 weeks or 3 months, but then have a perfect foot for the rest of their life, I would make that trade every time. Because it would have huge lasting benefits. And I agree. Like, if I could chop the heels off and force those horses to load the back of the foot so they could build healthy, robust frogs and digital cushions, in 3 months or something, and then they'd be happy, I would do it. But it doesn't work like that. It just makes things worse. When you make a horse sore, and it's kind of like these retracted sole horses. I was like, I'm irritated with the horses, which is funny because it's not like it's their fault. But Bruno, he's sore, and I'm like, you weak, grumpy old thoroughbred. Like, why can't you be tougher? And it's not his fault that he lived in mud and, his soles are thin and soft. They never used to be. But if I force him to walk around like that, because I was his owner, she's wonderful. And she's like, you do whatever you need to do. And I totally get why he's sensitive. And she doesn't have boots for him. If he had boots, we could just throw those on and he'd be happy. But so there was no expectation to fix or do anything about it. But I bring him in and out of the pasture and he's sore walking on the gravel. And we have to walk over a little bit of gravel to get there. And it's a risk, right? If I force him to walk over that gravel, because I can and he will, I could cause a solar bruise that could lead to an abscess. He could then we have to deal with all of that. Also, as that sole is thin and weak, and his walls are flaring, he's walking on the rim edge of that coffin bone. Who knows if he could erode a little bit of the bone in the next 3 weeks before my next course, when I was probably going to put composite shoes on him anyway. Like, I don't know. I just weigh out all of those things. And then sure, he's retired. So do we care about his muscling? Well, he does, right? Like, he cares about how he feels, even though we might not, in that type of mindset. Like, who cares what kind of top line the 24-year-old retired thoroughbred has? He does. And so, if he's moving all tight and funny, he's going to have tightness through his muscles. He's using all the wrong ones. His back is hollow. Like today, when I put those composites on and he floated out over the gravel into the arena going back to his pen, all of a sudden he engaged his core and like he grew 4 inches instead of when he walked in all hollow and upright and tight. Like, that's not helpful in any way. And so, I guess that's going to be part of the journey for me this year, is how much of the trim do we compromise to keep the horse moving soundly? Because if they're not, they're not forging a healthy foot. Even if the hoof is ugly anyway, it's not going to get any better if we make them sore and they're not moving. So we have to really carefully walk this thin line of weighting the back of the foot and building health and strength through that digital cushion, bringing in wall connection, elevating the coffin bone, growing the adequate concavity and the thick sole, and not trimming so much that we make them sore in the process. Or, you know, and I'm not saying trim them so they're sore and add a composite, but if we can add a composite shoe and kind of progress a little bit faster through some of those things, then I'm going to do that every time, which is, it's a little hard every time I make those statements because in my head I think, you're a barefooter. I'm not anymore, I guess. I guess I just have to, I actually think we should get rid of that term. And I think I should just be a farrier. I'm just not a farrier who uses metal shoes. I still trim the hoof and I still apply things and I still want to make the horse better. You know, I guess I just get trapped in that mindset of I was so pro barefoot for so long, and I still am. I think all horses should be able to get barefoot, but we have to help them get there. Just pulling their shoes off and forcing it, there is absolutely nothing natural about that. There's nothing natural about horses anyway, and I'm the most natural-minded horse owner you will come across. I love natural horsemanship and bitless and barefoot and all of these things. And yet I have all these horses in composite shoes and I sometimes ride in a bit and I put blankets on my horse in the winter to keep her clean. There's nothing natural about those things. There's nothing natural about us riding horses. So we do have to have this open mind and allow for some of this interpretation. Anyway, Julie said, are composite shoes more effective than boots? I'd have to say yes. I wish I could say no. I wish I could tell you that boots were the be all end all. They're great. And when we didn't have composite shoes, man, they helped so many horses and we did so many wonderful things. And if you have a horse that has pretty good feet and is 100% happy and sound where they live, but you just need extra protection on a trail ride or to go do something, boots are fantastic. I think they still have a huge place in the industry. And you can do rehab with boots. We did it for years. They will help a laminitic or foundered horse. We can put padding in them for the horses with the weak back of the foot. They're still great. I personally think that we can do more with a composite shoe because it's more like a prosthetic device attached to the bottom of the foot. I mean, it is. And we can grind it and shape it and mimic the natural hoof just a little bit better. Whereas with a boot, being that it has to fit over the foot, even the most form-fitting streamlined boots exaggerates the hoof print of the foot and therefore adds a little bit of leverage. And it's not as easy to modify a boot as it is a composite shoe. Like you can't, I mean, you could take your brand new, you know, $300 set of boots and grind in a better breakover and grind a little bit of a quote rocker to the back of the heel, or you could super glue some padding in them, but you're going to drastically reduce the lifespan of your boots in doing those things. Or let's say you want to use them for multiple horses, or you want to change it up and try different things. It's a lot harder to do in a boot. It can be done, and we did it for years, but the composite shoes just have become like, I actually kind of feel like they're a cheat code to the system because it's so much easier to just put on the shoe and grind it down and make it like the hoof would be if the hoof were healthy. And so it allows that horse to go and move as if it had healthy feet. In the meantime, what we're doing with our trim is allowing things to grow in different ways that the hoof will be healthy at some point. I just watched I watched a video on the Glue On Composite Shoe group on Facebook where oh, what's her name? Kristen, I think. Kristen or Kirsten. I might be wrong in that. She was applying a leather pad underneath a composite shoe, and she was showing how she did it and what type of pads and packing she uses. And it kind of sparked some ideas in my brain. So I went online and ordered a bunch of leather pads and pour-in packings. And then I thought, for the heck of it, I'm going to order the acrylic glue and glue the speeds on as they are meant to. That probably won't last long. Every time I try that, I hate it. But I'm going to try it anyway. And so anyways, the whole idea is I feel like composite shoes allow us to be so much more creative and do so many different things. Add a little piece here or a wedge there or a lift here or grind this down to be tapered. You can't necessarily do that in the boot. And the horse wears it 24/7. You don't have to take it off. You don't have to clean it. Unless your application's not great and they fall off. But I just find it more user friendly. And because it's not over and above or around the outer circumference of the hoof, it doesn't expand the hoof print and add leverage. And then you don't have to worry about rubbing and sweating and all of those things. I don't want to minimize boots though. It can totally be done with boots. I don't know. I guess I'm a creative, crafty person, and I like the the way I can alter it to meet the hoof. Keep us posted on the leather pads. Really dislike the dim application with it sliding when putting on the shoe. Yeah, it's a bit of a thing. You have to get used to it. I still love the dim. I hate pour-in pads. I don't find them soft enough, and I don't like that they can squish everywhere. I may or may not want them. The leather pads, I'm thinking more of a couple different applications. One across the whole bottom of the shoe, well, bottom of the hoof under the shoe, you know what I mean? Kind of as just a protection if we have, say, a really flat sole and I don't want to take my knife and carve out concavity to remove the pressure points. If we already have a thin sole, I don't want to make it worse, but I don't want to leave those pressure points under the shoe to get to cause bruising. But I'm thinking a leather pad might kind of absorb a little bit of that and allow me to be a little more conservative with the trim. And then the other thing I was thinking is on those horses, we could, like what she did in the video I watched, is she cut out a rim pad up on top of the shoe, which I thought was like, the shoe is already providing so much concavity. I don't know why you would need a rim pad the same width as the shoe. But what I was thinking is I could cut the rim pad half the thickness of the shoe and again, provide a little bit of relief under that solar surface. But the shoe will still flex a little bit. These are just the thoughts I was having. None of them will probably negate the dim, probably. But the pour-in pads, I'll try and let you know. Those are nice because you put them in after. And I ordered the really nice Castle Plastic mesh pads. She also said she doesn't use mesh anymore because it's too cumbersome. I don't actually find the mesh difficult to work with. But okay, cool thing I learned from her video is she puts the leather pad in the shoe and uses a staple gun to staple it to the shoe. So it doesn't move. And I'm like, why have I not been stapling the mesh to the shoe? Like, I mean, it's not hard. I just pick up the foot, put the dim, squish the mesh on and put the shoe on. But we could staple the mesh to the shoe too and not have to worry about it sliding or falling out. But I will keep you posted on the pour-in pad and all of that. And the glue. I find, perhaps it's my laziness and I don't know. I find like the adhere or the acrylic glues, some of them to be extremely finicky with your hoof prep. Like you have to have the most perfectly clean hoof in the world, and then you have to torch it so there's not an ounce of moisture. And I don't know if any of you have ever played with that, but when you take a moisture meter to a hoof, like one that you haven't torched, for me, it's usually like 30% moisture or 65% moisture, depending if it's raining or whatever. And then you torch it for like 5 minutes and then you check it again. It's gone down like, I don't know, 2 or 5. I don't know if it's a percentage or degrees or whatever it goes down. And I'm like, oh, that did nothing. And you're supposed to torch it until that moisture meter reads 0. Well, that takes a really long time. And the horses are afraid of the sound of the torch, and I lit flash on fire once. Like it's a whole thing. Like it's not that easy to just torch the bottom of a hoof that long. But then once you do that, then you want to wire brush it, and then you want to clean it, and you don't want to touch it, and then you want to get the glue on it, and you don't want the horse to move and flex the glue bond before it's totally cured, or it won't hold up. And then you turn the horse out in your wet grass pasture, and the hoof absorbs all that moisture again, and the glue bond pops off again. And so top that off with the fact that I'm highly allergic to that glue and break out in hives every time I even brush a hint of it on my skin, and I just do not enjoy it. Today I got super glue all over my face. Ask me how I did that. I don't even know how I did that. Putting Bruno's shoes on, he was kind of dancing around, and by the time I finished, I was like, oh, I have this weird little what is on my face? Super glue. Somehow I got super glue on my face. I just picked it off and have no reaction. So to me, those shoes are the glues are a huge pain. But that's what they designed the new Easy Shoe Speed to use. It's not like I couldn't just cut the cuff off and put tabs on and use super glue. That was my plan. In fact, I actually want to grind the little bumps off the inside of the Speed cuff and see if I can cheat the system and use super glue. I'm going to try that. But I thought I would try these glues again just for fun. Probably I'll hate them. Anyways, what did Julie say here? The whole idea of having to glue on the shoe before the glue sets and the saran wrap, etc., is anxiety inducing. Yeah, okay, but again some cheats to the system. If you're not using DIM or hoof packing, or if you're going to use a pour-in pad, it's a lot less stressful because you can put the shoe on the foot with no glue or anything and not panic. You can spend 10 minutes getting it in the exact spot you want it with the hoof on the ground and bribe your horse with grain so they don't move. Or you could have somebody else pick up the other foot so they can't move that foot. And then you take your super glue and you put it in your tabs, and then you don't even have to use the saran wrap. You can use electrical tape and tape around the tabs when the shoe is on the floor. And so if you had a quiet horse or one that would bribe easily with grain, or somebody to lift up another leg, and of course the horse would be patient enough to stand on the one for a little while, it kind of takes a lot of that anxiety out. Now, there's reasons I like the saran wrap better than the electrical tape. If I've got a super deformed flared hoof, I like how the plastic wrap conforms the tabs to the hoof a little bit more, but you can do that with electrical tape. You'll just use half a roll. It's cheap. And you lose a little bit of glue out the bottom, whereas with the plastic wrap, I feel like it encapsulates more of the glue on the outside, and so it seals your tabs a little bit, which you're going to seal anyway. So the biggest stressful part of the whole thing isn't until you start gluing, and then it's from the glue to wrap moment, whether that's plastic wrap or electrical tape. After that, that part is over. And if you are using hoof packing, then yes, it's a lot more stressful to get it all lined up. In my last course, we had a moment. My glue bottle clogged, which never happens because I always double check that. And I thought I had, before I start anything, I make sure my glue is good and I got all my stuff. My horse is bribed. Okay, let's go. Well, for some reason, I had checked it, I guess, but I guess I missed it. My glue was clogged. And so I had a horse standing in the barn. I had put the hoof packing, put the mesh, put the shoe on, put the foot down. I was happy. I went to glue it and had no glue. And I came back and I could not get that bottle of glue to unclog. And so I had someone, I yelled at them, pick up her foot, the other one. So she's standing on that, because worst case, the hoof packing will then set in the exact shape I want it. It's not going to adhere the shoe to the hoof at all, but it will set exactly as I need it. And I could come back and fuss with it 10 times as long as it's right where I need it, and then glue it. And it turned out I could not get that bottle of glue to work. I had to go get a second one out of my office. They come with a little, like those little silver covers under the lid. So you have to remove the lid, get that off, put the lid back on, open it up. By the time I got over there and glued that damn shoe, the hoof packing was cured, but I can't remember who held up the other leg, but that horse hadn't moved. She had a bucket of grain. They held up the leg. I got the glue on, got it wrapped, and we were no worse for the wear. But it was a stressful moment because I had screwed up and not, I guess, thoroughly checked the glue. Anyways, shoe related question. Can we super glue tabs on instead of welding? I finally got the gluing and hoof prep down so it stays, but your weld broke. No, the super glue won't hold. Probably you underwelded. I find everybody underwelds. They heat up both till they're shiny and they stick them together and they stick for 5 minutes, but they are not totally melted together. You need to melt them just a little bit more so that you actually see the inside kind of running, and then on both the inside of the tabs and the shoe, and then stick them together. If only one is liquidy and the other one is not, again, they will last for a day. They won't last the whole cycle. I probably over melt mine. That's just me. I'm kind of like that. And so I really want them to become one. in the past, when I had welding issues, I used little tiny screws and I screwed it in like 6 spots. And you can totally do that. It's really time consuming. It's very hard to screw them in and it twists your tabs. And you need to make sure the screws are not pointing up or down. They have to be perfectly straight and they have to be short. What are you doing back there? Do you need to pee? Come here. And so I found, honestly, I just got better at welding. Take 5 more minutes to do your welding and not have it break. That would be my suggestion. Okay. Also, Duplo Canada makes a very cool welding table. Okay. Do you want to come here or not? Come and say hi. He's like, no, I want to open the door and go play with the dogs. Nap time is over, I guess. Duplo Canada makes a really cool welding table. It's like a little piece of metal and you attach your heat gun to the bottom of it, and then it blows the heat up through this little curved nozzle, and you can turn your shoe and put your tab in, and it has a little roller to squish them together. I'm gonna order one. I mean, I don't necessarily need it, but if it makes things easier, that's always cool. And I thought for the students that come to do my courses, they might enjoy it. Hang on, I'm gonna open that door so he doesn't pee in my tack room. Okay, here you go. Go be a dog. He knows the big dogs are out there, so. But anyways, I'm gonna order one of those tables. They come in small and large, and so I'll show you guys when I get it, and see if it's any better. I just thought it would help the students out, and it's part of my, I'm considering selling those Duplo products, so I wanna see what the table's like, because then if it's awesome, then I'll sell it and it'll be great, but if it sucks, I won't sell it. So I'll let you know. I know a friend has one and she thinks it's fantastic, but she always struggled with the welding too. So I think what I really can say is just practice more with your welding. You will get better at it and it will get cleaner and it won't look so messy and then they won't break. It's not really the case of doing something different, I think. Great. Let's see. Any more questions or did we cover it? We kind of covered a lot. But that's the point, so that's good. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up then and get these videos spliced together and up. And what is it today? Saturday. So we'll do the weekly check-in on Monday if anything else comes up. All right. Thanks you guys for joining me. It was great to have you here. Amanda, I thought you were bike riding today.
I did. I didn't know the start time, so we started at 8, wheels were on the road at 8 a.m. So we finished at 5. I was only like 10 minutes late. That's not bad. So yeah, 4 hours. I guess that was enough time to go the few little bit that we did. So I was happy I got to see you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for rushing home to hang out with me. That's awesome. I appreciate it. All right. I'll see you guys Monday. Have a good rest of your weekend.